Today we will be factoring, completing the square, taking the square root, and using the quadratic formula to solve polynomials. So let's start with x squared minus 4 equals 0. We're going to work this one two ways. First, we're going to work it by factoring. And to work this one by factoring, we need to realize that x squared minus 4 is a difference of squares. So we can factor that as x minus 2 and x plus 2. And then we can use the zero product property, which says if a times b is 0, then either a or b is 0, which is what we're assuming here. We solve for x in both equations, and we get that -2 and +2 are our solutions. So that is how we can solve by factoring. We could also solve by taking the square root. So if we have 4x squared minus 4 equals 0, to solve by the square root method, we only want to have a square term and a constant term. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. I'd have x squared equals 4. I can take the square root of both sides and I get x equals plus or minus 2. Because I introduced a square root, so I have to put in the plus or minus. So again, we get that x equals 2 and x equals -2, which we should get since we worked the same problems by two different methods. Okay, looking at this one, we're going to solve by completing the square. And the reason we're doing that is if you look, you can see that we can't factor this one without having to do some extra work. So we're going to do this one by completing the square. And what I do for completing the square is I get the x's on one side and the numbers on the other. And I know that I'm going to add something to both sides. I have to add it to both sides because that's the only way that I can keep myself from changing my equation. So what I'm going to add to both sides is b over 2 squared. So on this side, I'm going to have 2 over 2 squared, and the same thing on this side. So I have x squared plus 2x plus 1 equals 3. I can factor the left, and I get x plus 1 squared equals 3. Now I'm going to use the square root method. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. So I have x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 3. I need to subtract 1 from both sides. So I get x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of 3. And that's how we can solve by completing the square. In addition, we could solve this one using the quadratic formula. So we're going to do the quadratic formula. So unlike the other ones, factoring only works when you can factor the polynomial. Square root only works when you have a square term and a constant term. Completing the square works most of the time. It's easier for some problems than others, but quadratic formula will work every single time. And the quadratic formula is derived from completing the square of a standard form of a quadratic, but it's x equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2 times a. And what we should know is that it only works when we have ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, which is what we have for this problem here. In this problem, we'll have x equals -2 plus or minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times -2 all over 2 times 1. Then we'll simplify. We have -2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 8 over 2. So this will be -2 plus or minus the square root of 12 over 2. We need to simplify this. We can simplify this radical into 2 square root of 3 over 2. All of these have a 2. We have a GCF. So we get x equals -1 plus or minus the square root of 3, which is the same thing we got from completing the square. So So these are 4 methods that you can use. Quadratic formula will work anytime, so most people prefer it, but sometimes it is faster to use factoring, square root, or completing the square. Let's look at one more problem here. Here I have 3x to the 4th minus 48x squared. And I need to solve this, so what I have to do first is I need to get everything on the same side. So I'm going to subtract 48x squared from both sides. And now I see a GCF, so I'm going to take a GCF out. That would be 3x squared, and I would be left with x squared minus 16. So after we take out our GCF, now we can't do anything else with this, but this is a difference of 2 squares, so we can factor that. So we have x minus 4 and x plus 4. And now we're going to set each one equal to 0. So we have 3x squared equals 0, x minus 4 equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0. Here, we can divide by 3, get x squared equals 0. We take the square root, we get that x equals 0. You don't have to do the plus or minus because 0 is just 0. Here we get x equals 4, and here we get x equals negative 4. So our solutions would be negative 4, 0, and 4. And you could also have used the square root method here. So in this video, we've talked about factoring, square root, taking the square root, completing the square, and using the quadratic formula to solve polynomials. And in this last problem, we kind of put some of them together to use them in a more difficult problem.